Hi, for this video what we're going to do is we're going to look at finding the extrema and also the domain and range of this function. So what we have here is a given function. This function does have an official start point and an end point, so it does not continue on forever and ever. Okay. For this, remember that a local maximum means that on an open interval that it is a highest point on that interval. Local minimum means a lowest point on that interval. Absolute maximum means the absolute highest point that the graph goes. Absolute minimum is the absolute lowest point that the point goes. Domain, remember, references your lowest x to your highest x, and range is your lowest y to your highest y. So let's first start with a local maximum. And a local maximum occurs where you have a highest point. You have a turn in your curve. So it has to be on an open interval. So an open interval, that means that from some point to another point that it's the highest point. And so for this one, this occurs at the point -1, 3. Because we are looking for the maximum, we are actually looking for the y coordinate. So the highest that this graph goes is 3 when x equals -1. Some textbooks write it as f of -1, so they put your coordinate equals 3 with your output. So that's the same thing. This is just another way. It's saying that we have a local maximum. It's not our highest point because we do have a point that goes higher than it, so it is local. Okay. Going on to the local minimum. A local minimum is the same thing. It has to be a lowest point, but it has to be localized. So we may look at this. We can see right here that we have a minimum point. So we do have a lowest point right here. Okay. The problem with this lowest point is that this is going to be our absolutely lowest point on the graph. So this would be considered an absolute minimum. So we have an absolute minimum at -3 when x equals 3. Or you could write it in function notation as f of 3 equals -3 is our absolute minimum. So -3 is our absolute lowest point that our graph goes. Okay. We do not have a local minimum. I know that you may be tempted to say that this is a local minimum because of the fact that it in reference to this, but it has to be an interval, so it does have to have something to the left and to the right of it, so it has to be an open interval. Since there is nothing to the left, it doesn't work. The endpoints cannot be local maximum or local minimums. Okay, an absolute maximum, you can have an endpoint be the absolute maximum. So on this one, our absolute max point is 4 when x equals 6. Okay, or at f of 6 equals 4, we do have a absolute maximum point. If there was a higher point where this turned at than this one, we would not call this a local max because, again, local maximum and minimums cannot be endpoints. So these two right here, they cannot be endpoints because it has to be on an open interval. Okay, so the last thing that we want to talk about is the domain and the range. The domain, remember, is our lowest x values. So the lowest we go to the left. So the lowest we go to the left on this graph is a -3. And then if I trace across this way, my graph continues until I get here. And so my domain goes from -3 to 6. My range, on the other hand, is referencing my lowest point, which would be at -3, and to my highest point on my graph, which would be 4. So the domain always tells us what x coordinates can be used in this. The range is always what y coordinates can be used. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know.